when a mistake happens, what gets investigated first?
Hmm. Yeah, that really is the central question, isn't it?
Right. Because, I mean, when a mistake appears, how do we know whether we are looking at just an individual event or evidence of a wider capacity constraint?
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today.
Yeah, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking a really granular, kind of uncompromising look at human error. Operational systems and those invisible conditions that really dictate how work actually gets done.
Right. We are essentially examining the architecture of failure.
Yeah, well put. And for you listening, we've got a really incredible stack of sources on the table to help us do this. First, we're looking at James Reason's seminal research on error management.
Which is pulled directly from the British Medical Journal.
Right. And we're layering that with the principles of human and organizational performance.
Often referred to as HOP for short.
Right, HOP. And that's drawn from the International Marine Contractors Association. Plus, we're integrating workplace fatigue risk management protocols and some really strict psychological safety frameworks that dismantle the cognitive mechanics of why human beings make mistakes in the first place.
It's a really rigorous collection of material. And, engaging with it requires us to fundamentally suspend our default reactions to failure.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to analyze how organizations traditionally and kind of instinctively respond when things go wrong.
Right, and contrast that starkly with what the empirical evidence suggests is actually happening in the layers beneath that failure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because
Yeah.
whether you were looking at, say, a manufacturing floor or a high-stakes healthcare environment, a marine vessel, or a global logistics hub.
Right, any complex system.
Exactly. If you step back from the daily noise and just observe, you do not see a random distribution of errors. You start to see very specific, unignorable, recurring patterns.
You do. But before we map those out, we really have to establish a strict boundary for this analysis.
Right.
We must present these strictly as observations. They are not definitive proof of causation in any single isolated incident.
Right, so we aren't saying X caused Y.
Exactly. What we are looking for are correlations embedded in work systems. We are looking at, well, the rhythm of the work.
The rhythm of the work. That is the perfect way to phrase it, because when you spend enough time observing an operation, you see exactly that. You see end-of-shift errors, mistakes that reliably, almost predictably, happen in the final hour of a 12-hour rotation.
Right. You also see errors heavily clustering in highly repetitive task environments.
Yeah, where the sheer volume of identical actions just seems to breed variance.
Exactly. And you observe recurring rework, too.
Oh, yeah, like a subtle but growing dependence on checking activity.
Right, where the organization silently adds layers of inspection because the primary process is no longer trusted.
Yeah, that happens all the time. And you also see increasing corrections across consecutive work periods.
Right.
Let's say a crew is on day 12 of a 14-day rotation.
Yeah.
The quality doesn't just dip randomly, it declines at very specific, predictable stages of a task.
Exactly.
So when you look at that on a timeline, it doesn't look like a collection of individuals suddenly deciding to lower their standards. It looks like a pattern.
Yeah.
It looks like the system itself has a rhythm of failure.
What's fascinating here is how historically resistant organizations are to acknowledging that rhythm.
Oh, completely.
The default posture is to treat each of those observations as an individual performance anomaly, a unique glitch in human focus.
Right.
But if we turn to James Reason's seminal research, specifically his seventh principle of error management, he states this explicitly. He says many errors fall into recurrent patterns.
Wait, I want to pause on that.
Yeah.
Because that challenges the entire architecture of modern performance management.
It really does.
He's basically saying that the pattern itself is the signal. The mistake is just the messenger.
Precisely. Let us explore the math of that for a second.
Right.
If you have 10 different, highly trained individuals making the exact same error at the exact same physical point in a process under the exact same conditions,
Right.
what is the probability that 10 independent people suffered a simultaneous, localized failure of moral character or focus?
I mean, it's statistically absurd.
Exactly. Yet, treating each of those 10 errors as an individual failing completely misses the reality of the work environment. The pattern is communicating a capacity constraint.
Wow.
The system is operating at the absolute edge of its tolerance.
Which brings us to a very strict regulatory reality regarding what actually drives some of those physical and cognitive constraints.
Yes.
We aren't just talking about abstract theory here.
Hmm.
We need to look at what the occupational safety authorities dictate as baseline operational reality.
Yes, and we must be highly precise and objective here.
Exactly. OSHA identifies demanding schedules, extended shifts, and irregular work schedules as contributors to fatigue, stress, and reduced concentration. So, I mean, if we know that as a baseline, undeniable fact that demanding schedules contribute to reduced concentration, how do organizations typically react when that reduced concentration inevitably leads to an error?
This raises an important question about the asymmetry of attention in our workplaces.
Asymmetry of attention, I like that.
When an error occurs, there is an immediate, almost gravitational pull toward the individual who committed the act.
Oh yeah, the person becomes hypervisible, the spotlight immediately snaps onto them.
Precisely. The person who committed the error becomes intensely visible, while the surrounding conditions that produce the error, the schedule, the tool design, the lighting, the competing priorities, they remain entirely invisible.
Right.
James Reason's BMJ paper breaks this asymmetry down beautifully. He distinguishes between two fundamental paradigms, the person approach and the system approach.
And it's fair to say the person approach is the default setting for most of the industrialized world.
It is the absolute default. The historical person approach focuses obsessively on unsafe acts. It blames individuals for forgetfulness, for inattention, or, in the worst cases, for a perceived lack of care.
Yeah. And because it diagnoses the problem as a human flaw, the countermeasure is predictably aimed at the human.
Exactly.
You see poster campaigns demanding vigilance, you see blanket retraining mandates, you see disciplinary action.
Right. And the underlying assumption is staggering when you really think about it. It assumes that the system is perfect, and if people just tried harder, nothing would ever go wrong.
Yeah, which is just not reality. And here is where the source material gets into the friction of reality.
Right.
Because if we look at the psychological safety frameworks regarding the types of human error, they break down the actual neurological mechanics of how people make mistakes. Because a mistake isn't just one monolithic thing.
Right. They categorize these failures into slips, lapses, and mistakes.
Yes, and understanding the difference between them absolutely shatters the person approach.
This distinction is vital for understanding true operational capacity. Let's look at the cognitive mechanics, starting with slips. Slips are execution errors. You are essentially on cognitive autopilot.
Right.
You know exactly what to do, your intention is perfectly correct, but the physical execution fails, your hand moves the wrong way, you press the green button instead of the blue button.
And the crucial context here is why someone is on autopilot. You don't go on autopilot when you are learning something new.
No, you don't.
You're hyper-focused then. Autopilot only happens when a task is highly practiced.
That is the paradox of expertise. Slips happen precisely because a worker is highly skilled and the task is highly repetitive.
Wow.
The brain optimizes energy by shifting highly practiced routines to lower-level cognitive processing.
Right. And then you have lapses, which are memory failures.
Exactly. You are executing a familiar sequence, you get interrupted by a radio call, and you drop a step in the sequence.
Right. And again, this is a failure of human working memory, which is notoriously limited. It's not a failure of intention. I struggle with how organizations handle this, honestly. If someone is highly trained, a manager's instinct is to say, you know better than this.
Yes, it's a very common reaction.
But the psych safety frameworks are telling us that slips and lapses happen because they know the task so well that their brain has automated it.
Right.
So yelling at someone to pay more attention to an automated repetitive task goes against the biological reality of how human skill acquisition actually works.
It is completely counterproductive. You cannot discipline a human brain into expanding its working memory, and you cannot write a policy that outlaws cognitive fatigue.
Right.
Then, distinct from slips and lapses, you have actual mistakes.
Okay, so how are those different?
Mistakes are rule-based or knowledge-based errors. The action proceeds exactly as planned, but the plan itself is flawed.
Ah, I see.
You misread a diagnostic gauge and apply the wrong operational rule. Or you're in a novel, unprecedented situation with incomplete information, and you make a decision that, only in the harsh light of hindsight, turns out to be wrong.
Which leads directly into one of the most challenging concepts in the sources,
Yes.
the local rationality principle.
Yes. The local rationality principle is a cornerstone of systemic analysis.
Okay, unpack that for us.
It states that people do what makes sense to them given their goals, their knowledge, and their focus of attention at that exact moment in time.
Right.
No one wakes up, drives to work, and thinks, I am going to intentionally miscalibrate this machinery today.
Yeah, exactly.
If a highly trained, competent worker makes a decision that leads to an error, the investigative burden is not to ask, why were they so foolish?
Right.
The burden is to ask, why did that decision make complete sense to them at that specific moment?
The source material provides a brilliant thought experiment for this.
It does.
Imagine a competent, experienced worker who fails to connect a machine's safety mechanism.
Okay.
It is a memory lapse, they got distracted, they missed a step. What does an organization do?
In an isolated instance, you certainly don't terminate them for a single working memory lapse. You recognize human fallibility. You might implement a checklist or a visual reminder.
Right. But what if that same highly competent worker does it 10 times in a month?
Now the organization views it as a severe behavioral problem.
But what if we expand the lens? What if 100 times across multiple different workers on multiple different shifts, that exact same safety mechanism is left disconnected?
At that point, the system itself is communicating a flaw. It is screaming at you.
Yeah.
The data is telling you that the mechanism is poorly designed, or it requires excessive physical force, or the production workload simply does not allow the time required to connect it without falling behind schedule.
The person made one mistake. The schedule has apparently avoided the interview.
It is a dry but fiercely accurate observation of organizational behavior. We ruthlessly interrogate the human operator for their momentary lapse, but we almost never interrogate the production schedule that forced the operator to perform at reduced capacity.
Yep.
We don't put the workflow on the disciplinary stand.
This is exactly where human and organizational performance, or HOP, comes into play. The sources pull from the International Marine Contractors Association, an industry dealing with incredibly complex, high-stakes, physically punishing environments.
Right.
They outline HOP not as a quick-fix tool, but as a foundational operating philosophy.
The distinction between a tool and a philosophy is critical for leaders to grasp.
Yeah.
You do not just do HOP on a Tuesday afternoon after an incident. It is not a root cause analysis template. It is a fundamental lens through which you view your entire operation every single day.
Let's break down the core principles of HOP mentioned in the sources, because they systematically dismantle that traditional person approach.
Okay, let's do it.
Principle 1, human error is normal, mistakes are inevitable.
Right.
Principle 2, blame fixes nothing.
Exactly.
Principle 3, context drives behavior.
If we look closely at that third principle, context drives behavior, it is the linchpin of the entire philosophy. Well, an organization's historical unstated view is usually that their technologies, their written procedures, and their facility designs are robust and perfect.
Right.
Therefore, if a failure occurs, the worker must be the broken component. The system is fine. The human is defective.
But the system approach,
Yeah.
as James Reason defines it, forces a much more difficult realization.
It does.
It recognizes that you cannot change the human condition. You cannot train a human being to never experience a memory lapse under pressure.
No.
You cannot policy away fatigue. But you can change the conditions in which humans work. You can change the context.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, treating a system capacity problem as a personal performance problem guarantees that the actual operational bottleneck or hazard is never resolved.
Right.
Think about the life cycle of that approach. You discipline the worker. Perhaps you even terminate the worker.
And that happens a lot.
You spend time and capital hiring and training a replacement. And 6 months later, the brand new, highly motivated worker makes the exact same mistake at the exact same machine. Why? Because the context remained entirely identical. The trap was left perfectly intact.
You are swatting mosquitoes while ignoring the swamp,
Yes.
which, as the sources note, is James Reason's 12th principle of error management.
Exactly. Continuous operational reform means doing the heavy, difficult work of draining the swamp rather than the easy, visible work of swatting the mosquitoes.
So what does this all mean for a leader, an operations manager, or a safety coordinator who is sitting at a desk looking at a stack of recurring incident reports?
Right.
If the surrounding conditions that produce the error, the swamp, are largely invisible, how do we force them into visibility?
Well, the source material introduces a highly specific, structured method for exactly this purpose.
Okay.
It is a diagnostic approach aimed entirely at shifting the organizational perspective from the individual to the environment.
But before we detail the mechanics of this, we need to establish incredibly clear parameters.
Yes, we do.
This diagnostic is called the capacity pattern check, sometimes referred to in the sources as the error pattern review. We must state repeatedly and unequivocally that this is a writer-developed educational method that is not validated and is not an OSHA tool.
I will reiterate that to ensure absolute clarity. The capacity pattern check is a writer-developed educational method that is not validated and is not an OSHA tool.
Right.
Its singular purpose is to act as a cognitive forcing function, to shift the organizational lens away from human blame and towards systemic visibility.
With that strict limitation firmly established, let's explore how a practitioner would actually utilize the 6 steps of this capacity pattern check.
Because we're moving from theory to operational reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Step 1 is identify. You are asking, where do errors occur? You literally map them out on the physical floor plan or the digital process map.
The transition here is profound. You are forcing the investigation to move away from who made the error, and instead demanding to know where the error lives within the system geometry. Does it live at the transition point between 2 departments? Does it live at the machine furthest from the supervisor's desk?
Step 2 is compare. Look at error frequency by shift stage. This is where we bring the element of time into the geometry. Do these specific errors happen in hour 1, when people are fresh, or hour 11?
This begins to intersect with the OSHA guidance regarding extended shifts and demanding schedules.
Right.
If your data shows that errors heavily index in the final 20% of a work period, the time dimension of your system is communicating a constraint.
Wow.
It is telling you that the cognitive or physical endurance required by the task does not match the duration of the shift.
Step 3 is observe. Review patterns across consecutive work periods. We aren't just looking at a single day anymore. Is this error happening on their first day back from rest or on their 14th consecutive day on shift?
Again, we are evaluating cumulative systemic load. We are moving past the concept of momentary focus and looking at physiological and cognitive debt over time. If errors spike on day 12 of a rotation, the problem is the rotation schedule, not the individual's commitment to quality.
Step 4 is review. Map errors against task positions. If you cycle different personnel through different stations, what does the data show?
Exactly.
Is there one specific workstation or one specific software interface that generates 70% of all the rework, regardless of who is sitting there?
If a single position acts as a magnet for errors, regardless of the personnel staffing it, the design of that position is the primary variable.
That makes total sense.
It might be a poorly designed user interface, confusing labeling, or excessive ambient noise. The personnel are merely the victims of the design.
Step 5 is verify. Check whether workload or scheduling conditions changed around the time the pattern emerged. This is the context check.
Right.
Did the facility just increase production speed by 10%? Did we reduce the headcount on the line to save costs? Did a new supplier change the raw materials?
You are rigorously verifying the macro operational context that surrounded the micro event. You are looking for the invisible pressures that alter local rationality.
And finally, step 6 is escalate. Push these recurring patterns up for operational review. You take this mapped, temporal, contextual data, and you force the organization to look at it.
The goal of this entire method is strictly visibility, not certainty.
Right.
It does not hand you a definitive answer. What it does is shift the fundamental organizational question from why did this person mess up to how did this event happen?
Which is a huge shift.
It is. Asking why almost inevitably leads backward to a person and quickly descends into cyclical discussions of blame. Asking how directs thinking outward toward weaknesses in systems, processes, and the work environment.
The retraining program occasionally receives assignments from departments it has never met.
That is the ultimate tragic symptom of an organization lacking systemic visibility.
Yeah, it really is.
When management cannot see its own constraints, when it cannot see the swamp, it defaults to the only lever it feels it has complete control over, worker training.
Right.
It creates a Sisyphean loop where a worker is fully trained, placed back into a flawed context, fails due to that context, and is then sent back for more training on a task they already know how to do perfectly.
There is a visual metaphor described in the source field notes that captures this organizational blindness perfectly. I want you to picture this. It is a thought experiment.
Okay.
Imagine a large, beautifully designed operational review environment. Think brushed aluminum, clean lines, functional modernism.
Right.
In the center foreground, there was one single worker, and made a small operational mistake. And everyone in the organization, supervisors, quality assurance, safety managers, executives, is hovering around this individual.
Mhm.
They have inspection lights focused on the worker's hands. They have clipboards checking off procedural deviations. The entire intellectual and financial effort of the organization is intensely aggressively focused on this one person.
It is a scene of intense microanalysis. But if you take a step back from that focal point, what do you see in the background of this image?
Right. In the background, shrouded in the shadows of the facility, you see the true capacity constraint.
Exactly.
You see an extended workflow stretching out forever. You see excessive, punishing task repetition. You see multiple completed operational cycles with absolutely no built-in reset space.
Yeah.
The work is just relentless, grinding forward. But no one is looking at it because the lights are all pointed at the worker.
That image perfectly encapsulates the asymmetry we are dissecting. The entire system is organized, funded, and structured around correcting the downstream symptom, the human operator.
Right.
Meanwhile, the upstream constraint, the demanding schedule, the lack of recovery time, the poor ergonomic design remains completely untouched, largely ignored, and free to produce the exact same error tomorrow.
It is a striking visual that really forces a reevaluation of how we spend investigative resources. But it also brings us to a very necessary, very rigorous point in this deep dive. We have to talk about limitations. Because when you introduce concepts like HOP or systemic analysis, it is very easy for an organization to swing the pendulum entirely in the other direction, adopting a fatalistic view where every mistake is the system's fault and no one is responsible for anything.
Yes, we must maintain strict analytical rigor. The desire to find systemic causes cannot become an excuse to make unsupported assumptions. The data must lead.
The sources are incredibly clear on this, and we must state these limitations explicitly. First limitation. Fatigue cannot be assumed. Just because an error happened at the end of a shift or on day 12 of a rotation does not scientifically prove the worker was fatigued.
We must remember that correlation is not causation.
Right.
An end-of-shift error could certainly be fatigue, but it could equally be due to equipment degradation that happens after 12 hours of continuous use.
Well, that's a good point.
It could be due to ambient temperature changes in the facility as night falls. It could be a dozen other physical variables. You cannot use the pattern as a definitive diagnosis.
Second limitation, building on that. The pattern may have multiple causes. This writer-developed capacity pattern check does not establish causation.
It functions as a spotlight, highlighting specific areas of the system geometry for deeper investigation. It does not hand you a neatly packaged root cause.
Third limitation. Operational constraints vary wildly. What is true in one facility or one specific industry may not be true in another.
A marine vessel operating offshore deals with physiological, environmental, and isolation pressures that are fundamentally different from an onshore logistics hub or a sterile manufacturing floor.
Right.
You cannot copy and paste systemic assumptions from one environment to another.
Fourth, and this is crucial for anyone struggling with these concepts, accountability still matters. This diagnostic does not replace formal investigations, and it does not remove individual accountability.
Understanding context does not eliminate standards.
So what does this all mean? I want to push back on this, or at least explore the friction here, because this is where managers get frustrated.
Okay, let's explore it.
If we are saying, based on the HOP principles, that blame fixes nothing and context drives behavior, but we are also strictly stating accountability still matters, aren't those two ideas in direct conflict? How does an operation actually balance system thinking with accountability without sounding hypocritical?
They are only in conflict if you view accountability as synonymous with punishment.
Ah, okay.
In many traditional organizations, holding someone accountable is just corporate phrasing for blaming and punishing them.
That's very true.
True accountability is about taking responsibility for learning, transparently reporting, and actively participating in improving the system.
Right.
When you understand the context of an error, it simply ensures you are directing the accountability to the correct level. It ensures you are fixing the actual problem rather than swatting mosquitoes while ignoring the swamp.
Yeah.
Accountability means the worker owns their actions and their obligation to report hazards, but leadership owns the system that shaped those actions. You cannot hold a worker accountable for a system they do not have the authority to change.
Wow.
The corrective action was immediate. The underlying question remains scheduled for a future meeting.
Right. Because immediate discipline just feels like action.
Exactly. It satisfies the organizational and emotional urge to do something visible about a failure. But if you ignore the limitations we just discussed, and you ignore the systematic analysis, the underlying operational vulnerability remains entirely intact.
Yeah.
The capacity pattern check and the HOP philosophy broadly improves the questions we ask. It does not automatically provide the answers.
Which is precisely why we want to transition from theory to practice and hand this over to you, listening to this deep dive. We have a practical exercise derived directly from these frameworks and is designed to take you less than 30 minutes.
It is an exercise in fundamentally changing your organizational lens, using your own existing data.
Here's the challenge. I want you to take a look at your organization's recent errors, incident reports, or quality defects. Gather the data from the last month or the last quarter. Now, I want you to organize and group them, but strictly by 3 criteria. Group them by shift stage. When in the operational day did they occur?
Right.
Group them by task position, where physically or digitally did they happen? And group them by consecutive work periods, where were the workers in their rotation cycle?
The constraint is critical. Do not group them by the name of the operator.
Right, no names.
Do not group them by the type of safety rule that was broken or the department manager. Group them purely by the temporal and physical geometry of the work itself.
Once you've done that, ask yourself this prompt. What changes when the errors are organized this way? Look at the reshaped data and ask, do you still see a collection of flawed individuals, or do you start to see a system rhythm?
It is a profound, often uncomfortable question to ask of your own operations.
It really is.
To summarize what we have deeply unpacked today from this stack of research, first, the mistake may be real. The slip, the memory lapse, the error in judgment, it happened. We do not deny the event.
Second, the pattern may be real. The fact that the specific mistake reliably happened at hour 11 on a highly repetitive task for the 4th time this month, that is also a quantifiable reality.
And third, both deserve attention. You cannot effectively manage human error by focusing solely on the human, nor can you manage it by ignoring the human condition and only looking at the machinery. You must rigorously examine the intersection of the two.
What if the first thing we review is not who made the mistake, but where similar mistakes tend to appear?